China's new invention generates limitless clean energy. China just built a machine that generates limitless clean energy, and you have never heard the full story. The sun has been running on a process that produces zero carbon, zero radioactive waste, and zero risk of meltdown for 4.6 billion years. And a lab in eastern China just replicated it on Earth and broke every record scientists thought was physically unbreakable. That same year, China added over 430 gigawatts of new wind and solar, more than 8 times everything the United Kingdom built in 2 decades. And while the rest of the world debates whether any of this is even possible, China just made it the centerpiece of its national plan through 2030. It all starts with a machine they call the artificial sun. The machine that recreates the sun. If you want to understand why this matters, you need to understand what fusion actually is, because it is not what most people think. When you hear the word nuclear, your brain probably jumps to Chernobyl, Fukushima, mushroom clouds, radioactive wastelands. But that is fission, the splitting of heavy atoms. It is what happens when you take the 2 lightest elements in the universe, hydrogen isotopes, so abundant they exist in ordinary seawater, and you force them together under pressures and temperatures so extreme that they merge, releasing a burst of energy so powerful it is literally what keeps the sun burning. No carbon, no chain reaction that can spiral out of control, no spent fuel rods that stay radioactive for 10,000 years. The waste from fusion decays in decades, not millennia. And the fuel? You could power the entire planet for millions of years with the hydrogen sitting in the world's oceans right now. So why don't you have a fusion reactor powering your home? Because there is one problem that has defeated every scientist and every government that has ever tried to solve it. To make fusion work, you need to create and contain a plasma hotter than the core of the sun over 100 million degrees. At those temperatures, no physical material on Earth can hold it. Nothing you can build, nothing you can forge, nothing you can mine will survive contact with that plasma. So you have to contain it with magnetic fields, invisible walls of force that suspend a superheated cloud of matter in midair while you try to keep it stable long enough to extract energy from it. For decades, the best anyone could manage was a few seconds, sometimes a few fractions of a second. Every attempt ended the same way: the plasma would destabilize, the reaction would collapse, and the machine would need to be reset. The engineering challenge was so brutal that fusion became a punchline in the scientific community. Then China did something no one expected. In January 25, at the Hefei Institutes of Physical Science in Anhui Province, a team of researchers fired up the experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak, a device the size of a final exponent-Clive, 2-story building, wrapped in superconducting magnets, cooled to nearly 450 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, and they held a steady-state high-confinement plasma at over 100 million degrees for 1,066 seconds. Not a burst, not a flash, a controlled, stable plasma burn lasting nearly 18 minutes. The previous world record, also set by East, was 403 seconds. They did not just break it, they nearly tripled it. To put that in perspective, most fusion experiments before this were measured in single-digit seconds. Some of the most celebrated breakthroughs in Western fusion labs lasted less time than it takes you to brush your teeth. China held theirs for longer than it takes to hard-boil an egg, eat it, and boil another one. But China was not done. Less than 12 months later, in January 26, the same team at the same facility did something even more significant. Something that shook the theoretical foundations of fusion physics itself. They broke the Greenwald density limit. Now, if you have never heard that term before, here is why it matters. The Greenwald limit is an empirical boundary, a line in the physics that says, if you push plasma density above a certain threshold inside a tokamak, the plasma will violently destabilize, potentially damaging the reactor. For decades, every fusion experiment on Earth operated below that line, because crossing it was considered physically unworkable. East did not just cross it. They reached densities 1.3 to 1.65 times beyond the Greenwald limit and held the plasma stable. The researchers called what they found a density-free regime, a zone where plasma remains stable even as density rises far beyond what any prior theory said was survivable. They did not just break a record. They broke the rule that said the record was the ceiling. And yet, this was only the first of China's 3 breakthroughs, because while East was rewriting the laws of plasma physics, something just as consequential was happening on an island off China's southern coast, the reactor no one saw coming. Now here is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody in the West is paying attention to. Because while East was rewriting the future of energy, China was simultaneously solving a problem that every other nuclear nation on Earth has been stuck on for decades, and it was doing it on a tropical island most people associate with beach resorts. You need to understand something about nuclear power. The reactors you know, the massive concrete towers, the billion-dollar construction projects, the decade-long timelines, and the budget overruns that make your eyes water, those are conventional reactors. They work, but they are enormous, expensive, slow to build, and politically radioactive in every sense of the word. For years, the nuclear industry has pinned its hopes on a different idea, the small modular reactor. An SMR is exactly what it sounds like. A nuclear reactor small enough to be factory-built, shipped to a site in pieces, and assembled on location. Smaller, faster, cheaper. You do not need to build a cathedral of concrete. You do not need a decade of construction. You build one, you prove it works, and then you stamp out copies like an assembly line. That is the promise. Dozens of countries have had SMR designs on paper for years. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada. All of them have been talking about SMRs like they are the future of clean energy. In November 23, the most advanced SMR project in the United States NuScale Power's flagship plant in Idaho was canceled. The reason? Its cost had ballooned from $3.6 billion to $9.3 billion, and the utilities that were supposed to buy its power walked away. A decade of development, hundreds of millions in taxpayer money, and the whole thing collapsed without a single watt of electricity ever being produced. As of today, America does not have a single SMR under construction. Now look at what China did in that exact same window of time, on the southern tip of Hainan Island, at the Changjiang nuclear power plant. China National Nuclear Corporation built the Linglong One, a 125-megawatt small modular reactor that became the first SMR in history to pass the International Atomic Energy Agency's safety review. Back in 2016, construction broke ground in July 2021. By October 2025, it had completed its cold functional tests. By December 2025, it had finished non-nuclear steam startup. And it is now on track to begin full commercial operation in the first half of 2026, making it the world's first land-based commercial SMR. When it comes online, it will generate 1 billion kilowatt-hours of clean electricity every single year, enough to power over 500,000 homes while cutting 880,000 tons of carbon dioxide emissions. And it is not just an electricity source. The Linglong One is designed for cogeneration. It can simultaneously produce power, district heating, and desalinated seawater, which makes it deployable in places that conventional reactors could never reach. Island nations running on diesel, remote mining operations, industrial complexes that need reliable baseload power without the infrastructure of a major city. But here is the detail that should keep every Western energy strategist up at night. This is not a one-off. The Linglong One is not a trophy, it is a template. China is not building one SMR to prove a point. It is building one SMR to prove a production model. And analysts now estimate that China holds a 10 to 15-year lead over the United States in its ability to deploy fourth-generation nuclear technology at scale. While America's most prominent SMR project was drowning in cost overruns and cancellations, China was quietly pouring concrete, running tests, and preparing to flip the switch. And yet, the Linglong One is still not the full picture, because at the exact same time China was building the world's first commercial SMR, it was also doing something on a scale that makes every other nuclear program on the planet look like a side project. The largest nuclear build in human history. Here is a number that most people outside the energy world have never been told. As of early 2026, China has over 30 reactors under construction, representing nearly half of all nuclear reactors being built anywhere on the planet. Read that against this backdrop. The United States, France, and Canada, three of the most established nuclear powers in the history of the atom, have 0 reactors under construction, not one. Between them, they are building nothing. China is building more than the rest of the world combined. And the pace is accelerating. Since 2022, China has approved 10 or more new reactor units every single year for 4 consecutive years. In April 2025 alone, the State Council greenlit 10 additional reactors across 5 coastal sites, an investment worth roughly $27 billion in a single approval cycle. By the end of 2025, China counted 112 nuclear power units, either operational, under construction, or newly approved, with a combined capacity of 126 gigawatts. The target is 200 gigawatts by 2035, which would require building roughly 150 new reactors in the next decade. And if you think that sounds impossibly fast, consider this. Between 2015 and 2024, China built 37 reactors with an average construction time of 6.3 years, beating the global average of 9.4. Its fastest build clocked in at just 4.1 years from first concrete to grid connection. That is not a government making promises. That is a government delivering steel and concrete at a speed no other country on Earth can match. But the reactors are only half the story. What matters just as much is what they are replacing. Coal still dominates China's electricity grid. In 2023, it accounted for nearly 60% of total generation, the single largest share of any fuel source by a wide margin. China knows this is unsustainable. It knows that every ton of coal it burns deepens its carbon footprint, worsens its air quality, and keeps it tethered to a fuel source that the rest of the world is trying to leave behind. That is why the nuclear build-out is not happening in isolation. It is happening as part of a deliberate strategy to slash coal's dominance in the energy mix. The goal is to push non-fossil energy sources to account for a dramatically larger share of total electricity generation by the end of this decade, with projections showing coal's share potentially falling below 40% for the first time in modern Chinese history. Nuclear provides the missing piece that renewables alone cannot deliver: reliable, round-the-clock baseload power that keeps the lights on when the wind dies and the sun sets. Solar and wind handle the surges. Nuclear handles the floor. Coal becomes the backup, not the backbone. And if you are starting to sense a pattern here, fusion for the long-term future, SMRs for near-term flexibility, and a full-scale nuclear construction blitz to bridge the gap, then you are seeing exactly what China wants you to see. Because none of these breakthroughs are accidents. They are chapters in a single national strategy written into the most powerful planning document in Chinese governance. The blueprint behind the breakthroughs. Everything you have just heard. The artificial sun. The world's first commercial SMR. The largest nuclear construction program on the planet might sound like a collection of unrelated projects happening to come together at the same time. They are not. Every single one of them traces back to a single document that most people outside China have never read, and the few who have do not fully appreciate what it means. In March 26, China's National People's Congress approved the 15th five-year plan, covering 26 through 2030. Now, if you are not familiar with how China governs, you need to understand that a 5-year plan is not a suggestion. It is a resource allocation directive that reshapes entire industries. When a technology enters the 5-year plan, it gets funding, infrastructure, talent pipelines, and political protection that no budget cycle can touch. And for the first time, the 15th plan explicitly designated nuclear fusion as a frontline of great power scientific competition. China's annual spending on fusion is now estimated at $1.5 billion, nearly double the entire United States federal fusion budget. In 2024, the government established the China Fusion Energy Corporation, backed by 15 billion yuan. And by 2025, 47% of all authors published in nuclear fusion, the field's leading scientific journal, were Chinese. You heard that right. Nearly half of the world's frontier fusion research is now coming out of one country. You can see it being enforced in real time. From March 30th to April 1st, 2026, Premier Li Cheng personally conducted a field inspection across Sichuan Province, one of China's most critical energy hubs. He visited the Tongwei Global Innovation Research and Development Center, where China's solar photovoltaic technology is being refined at scale. He toured the Yalong River Hydropower Development Company, which is building a massive hydro-wind solar integrated energy base. And he inspected Tokamak Heavy Equipment Group and Dongfang Electric Machinery, manufacturers of nuclear power equipment and core reactor components. In China's political system, a premier's physical presence at a facility is not a photo opportunity. It is a signal to every layer of the bureaucracy about where national priorities lie and where resources must flow. Li Qiang was not visiting. He was directing. Then, on April 20th, he presided over a State Council study session on energy development, calling for deeper reforms to optimize the nation's energy structure. 2 days later, on Earth Day, the two highest bodies in China's political system jointly published a policy document calling for strict controls on fossil fuel consumption and greater oversight of heavy emitters. Experts called it the first high-level Chinese government document to explicitly link decarbonization with energy security and industrial development in a single directive. This is not a country experimenting. This is a country executing. And yet, before you conclude that China has already won this race, there is something you need to hear because the honest truth is more complicated than the headlines suggest. What the headlines are not telling you. Now, if everything you have just heard sounds too clean, too triumphant, too much like a country that has already figured out the future good, because that means you are paying attention. And you deserve the honest version. Fusion is not saving anyone today. East has not achieved ignition, the point where the fusion reaction sustains itself without external energy input. No tokamak anywhere on Earth has. The records China set are extraordinary, genuinely historic, but they are milestones on a road that still stretches a long way ahead. There is a vast engineering chasm between holding a plasma stable for 18 minutes and actually generating electricity from it. And there is an even wider chasm between a research reactor and a commercial power plant that feeds a city. The ITER reactor in France, the largest international fusion project ever attempted, to which China is one of 35 contributing nations, will not begin full deuterium-tritium operations until 2039 at the earliest, after its timeline slipped by nearly a decade and its budget overran by more than 5 billion euros. And ITER is not even designed to produce electricity. It is designed to prove that fusion can work at scale. The actual power plants come after that. If you are waiting for fusion to solve the climate crisis, you will be waiting a long time. Then there is the crisis that is hitting China right now, not in 2039, but today. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a third of the world's seaborne crude flows, has been effectively closed since early March 2026. Ship transits collapsed by 95% almost overnight. China receives approximately 40% of its oil imports through that strait. Yes, China stockpiled roughly 1.3 billion barrels of oil in reserve, enough to cover about 4 months of imports. Yes, it has overland pipelines from Russia and diversified suppliers spanning nearly 50 countries, but reserves run down, alternative routes carry higher costs, and global energy prices are surging. Oil is hovering near $100 a barrel. Global trade growth is expected to fall sharply. The pain is real, it is measurable, and no amount of long-term strategy erases the short-term damage of watching your most critical supply line shut off overnight. And that is exactly the point. Because the Hormuz crisis does not weaken China's clean energy strategy, it is the single most powerful argument for why that strategy exists in the first place. The real reason behind the race. This is the part of the story that most Western coverage of China's energy breakthroughs consistently misses, and once you hear it, everything you have just learned rearranges itself into a picture that is far more strategic than any headline has prepared you for. China is not pursuing fusion, SMRs, nuclear construction, and renewables simultaneously out of environmental idealism. It is not doing this because it wants to save the planet. It is doing this because it is the single largest importer of fossil fuels on Earth, and it just watched the most important energy choke point in the world slam shut with its supply lines still running through it. China's external dependence on crude oil sits above 70%. Nearly half of its oil imports have historically passed through or originated from producers whose exports transit the Strait of Hormuz. When that strait closed in March 2026, It did not just disrupt shipping routes, it validated every argument China's energy planners have been making for the last 2 decades. Every fusion record that East breaks is not just a scientific achievement, it is a step toward a future where China does not need the Strait of Hormuz at all. Every Linglong One SMR that comes online is not just a clean energy source, it is a power plant that runs on uranium, not oil from the Persian Gulf. Every new reactor in China's construction blitz is not just displacing coal, it is displacing a dependency that hostile governments can weaponize at will. And every gigawatt of wind and solar that China installs, over 430 of them in a single year, is a gigawatt that no foreign power, no sanctions regime, and no military blockade can ever take away. That is the calculation. That is what this is really about. China looked at the map, counted the choke points between its economy and the energy it needs to survive, and decided that the only permanent solution was to stop needing the energy that flows through those choke points altogether. Fusion is not a science experiment, it is an escape route. SMRs are not innovation for innovation's sake. They are insurance policies against exactly the kind of crisis that is unfolding right now. And the 15 billion yuan poured into the China Fusion Energy Corporation, the 10 new reactors approved in a single year, the premier personally inspecting nuclear core components in Sichuan, none of it is theater. It is a nation-state executing a survival strategy at a speed and scale that no other country on Earth is matching. And the most unsettling part for every other major economy watching this unfold? China's energy import exposure is shrinking. Its clean energy capacity is exploding. And its strategic vulnerability to the very choke points that are currently paralyzing global markets is falling. With every reactor that connects to the grid, every turbine that starts spinning, and every second that East holds a plasma stable at 100 million degrees. The sun has been generating limitless clean energy for 4.6 billion years. China just decided it could not afford to wait for anyone else to figure out how to replicate it. So it built the machine itself, broke the records itself, funded the strategy itself, and is now executing on a timeline that the rest of the world has not even agreed is possible. You can call it ambitious. But while the rest of the world was debating whether the future of energy was even achievable, China went ahead and started building it.